Hello, everyone. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for Working Holistically with Gender and Sexuality with Lisa Romero. I'm Laura Scapitici from the Anthroposophical Society in America, and I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. Lisa is here with us, and Stephanie Reines from AWNSA is here too, and she's going to introduce herself in a minute. But I see the numbers climbing. We have over 600 folks registered for this webinar. We're so glad you decided to come on to the call. And we thought if you can, in the Q&A, look there, if you can see the little Q&A box, move your mouse around and let us know where you're calling in from. If you're from a school or you're from an anthroposophical branch, let us know. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. So just go up to that Q&A if you can see it and let us know where you're calling in from. Yep, there we go. Here come some folks. All right, let's see. Oh, wow. Why can't I see it? Okay, I'm out here in Northern California. Stephanie, can you see the Q&A where people are calling in from?
I can see it's going up.
Okay, that's great. And can you see where some of the people are calling in from? And I know Lisa's in Los Angeles. We're all in California, aren't we, right now? So amazing. Okay. Yeah, I'm not able to access the Q&A to see where everyone's calling in from for some reason. Let me see if I can figure that out. 1 second. Okay, there we go. All right, we've got folks here from Ottawa and Maine and Marin County, Maine Coast Waldorf School, Santa Fe, Chelmsford, Massachusetts, Oregon. Look at all these people. This is amazing. I'm just going to read a few more so we get a sense of where everybody's coming from. Nelson, British Columbia, the Great Lakes branch in Michigan, Portland, Oregon. Thank you. Sydney, Australia. How about that? Kimberton, Pennsylvania, Maple Village Waldorf School in Long Beach. That's great. The Matreo branch of North Texas, the Denver Waldorf School, Green Mountain branch in Vermont. This is amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and being here tonight. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you. And now that everyone knows how to use the Q&A, we may have some time for questions at the end. So keep that in mind. Go ahead,
Thank
Stephanie.
you, Laura. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Reines, the Executive Director of Operations and Member Resources for the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America. I just want to also welcome everybody to this webinar on behalf of the 177 schools and institutes that are associated with AWNSA. I see a bunch of friends out there on the call, so hopefully we can regroup after this and see where we go from there and build on Lisa's work.
Thank you. Okay, well now I am lucky to have the privilege to introduce Lisa Romero, who has been out in the world doing work on meditation and sex education and technology and consciousness and all kinds of work. And so I'm so glad you're here with us, Lisa. I did just want to mention that in the follow-up email, people will be able to find out where you're going to be next, where your events are, and they can also go to developingtheself.org, and that's where all your work that you do with Waldorf schools is on sex ed, technology, arts, care for the senses, all those things. So thanks so much, Lisa. And I'm going to turn it over to you now so we can get into your presentation, and I'm going to pull up that PowerPoint in just a minute. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, hi, and hello, everyone. Yeah, wow, this is a very small session to carry a very large subject, but I thought it would be good just to start with some of the keys that can be very helpful in supporting our young people to navigate this very changing landscape around gender and sexuality. And I think, one of the questions that we can all ask ourselves is, what do we really want for our children? What do we want for our community when it comes to a relationship around gender and sexuality? And I think it's like many of the events that are so human in our life, we hope that what arises for them is that it's really a decision that they've made out of themselves, that they feel very happy and connected in themselves in relationship to gender and sexuality, and that they feel that they can actually celebrate in a certain way the choices they make, because it feels like it's an expression of who they are and how they recognize is the best way forward for themselves in life. And in saying that, we're also aware that the human being is conditioned by the collective consciousness of the community that they are brought up in. And Rudolf Steiner actually says by the age of 6 years old, the child is conditioned by the collective consciousness of the community. And so therefore, each one of us has conditioning around gender. We have conditioning around sexuality. And that means that as adults, when we are attempting to work with the generations that are coming, it's often a requirement in a certain way that we have a look inward to see, well, is the point of view that I'm coming from worked through out of myself, where I can actually feel free in my choices and support the freedom of the other? Or am I actually just handing down conditioning that was handed down to me? And this is something that is taking place as a kind of world phenomenon in a certain way. I know the Australian government is putting a lot of money, for instance, into a particular campaign that is supporting men to show and express their emotions. It's called Man Up campaign, and on Australian television we have TV personalities and sports personalities on TV crying, just to let other Australian men know it's actually important, it's okay to cry, because we've passed on through our culture this idea that boys shouldn't cry. And we know that, you know, by the age of 2.5, we're already stopping boys from crying as much, and we're stopping girls from tantruming as much. And then by the time they're 9.5, there is a clear sort of change in their behavior. 9.5, 10 years old, there's a clear shift in their behavior where they start to adapt how much they show of what's going on for them. And of course, the results of that in the community are not just an effect for a small group of people, because we are connected. The fact is that we have a man a day is taking his life in Australia. And that statistic is something quite to bear. You know, you're 4 times more likely to commit suicide as a man in America than as a woman. And we know that the health process of being able to show and experience your emotions, be able to connect with how you feel, is actually an important part of being healthy. On the other side of it, with girls that are taught not to sort of tantrum, not to create boundaries, not to express their rights, to actually say no to somebody crossing their boundaries, results in 10% of girls getting sexually assaulted whilst at college in Australia. I think it's 17% in America. So we're seeing that this shift is actually important as a society. But it's quite extraordinary for me that 100 years ago, Rudolf Steiner was placing into this education for this age some of the principles that are really now becoming evident in the mainstream. So it was the Children's Health Association that is asking the toy stores to stop putting all the action toys in blue boxes on one side of the toy store and all the homemaking toys in pink boxes on the other side of the toy store, out of the neuroscience that's actually showing that we actually need to expose children to a really wide variety of toys and actually let what lights up in them be the toys that they play with, rather than say you can only play excuse me, with certain toys according to your sex. And, you know, that was something that Steiner actually brought right into the first world of school. He said, in our schools, you'll see the boys and girls doing all of these things together. It has a social effect, but it actually has a developmental effect. And, you know, these conditions that we pass on according to the culture that we've brought up in actually can be very limiting to the human being and limiting to their expression of who they are. So we're now starting to see how useful it is for the health and well-being of society that we do not, as Steiner Court says, stuff others with how we think they should be, what we think they should be, but really try to help the individual to be nourished and to come forward in themselves. And that's the first prerequisite of a Waldorf teacher, to have reverence for this individuality and the capacities that they have. How would we support that? How would we support the students rather than see just their external bodily vehicle and respond to them according to their body type, rather than how do we actually look more deeply into the depths of the human being? And Steiner actually said this is going to be a necessity for the future of community, that we actually assess each other much more out of our ability to deepen life inwardly than on our peripheral self. Unfortunately, though, we live in a society where the peripheral personality, the exterior, the outer human being is more highly regarded or recognized than the inner human being. And so working holistically with gender and sexuality is a beginning process of trying to support that inner human being and not to stuff them with ideas of who we think they should be based on the outer human being. How do we help you become all you need to be? And just to give a little bit of a sense of the complexity of the human being, I just want to talk a little bit out of a part of the chapter that comes out of this book that I've written, Sex, Education and the Spirit. And why this title? Really because, in this world where there's, 8 billion people, over 7 billion recognize that we're more than just this physical body. And yet, when it comes to certain forms of how we live life, including education, often we ignore the fact that we are more than just a physical body. And so, the spirit, the individuality, the essential human being needs to be kept in the picture of all the aspects of our education. And it is really a communal responsibility to work healthily in these changes that are occurring, and not just to see these changes as outer events where we politically learn the right terminology, but actually don't make some very deep changes on how we work with each other on a much deeper level. And if the community itself can make some adjustments, then the next generation don't get the same level of conditioning that they actually have to overcome. So let's look at the first screen if we can, Laura. So I'm going to look at this, what I call the complexity of attraction. So in the sciences, we are looking at obviously physical attraction, and physical attraction is scientifically, they say whether you're attracted to someone within the first 3 minutes of meeting them. But the human being doesn't necessarily have that experience. That you could know someone for years before you feel actually attraction for them. So what the science says actually can register something of the human experience, but not all of it. And one thing I would say about supporting children to understand the complexity of attraction is that often we are asking children, young adults, teenagers, to be able to identify their complex inner world at an age where, for a lot of them, that's just not possible. So, for instance, we often asking a child to, already as a teenager, to already give their sexual orientation, whereas that's not necessarily easy for everyone, because we unfold the different aspects of our attraction to people over time. So physical, sexual attraction can arise for an individual anytime from sort of the beginnings of the capacity to procreate in the physical body with the onset of the maturation process of puberty, all the way through to 28 years old. And I know for some people they say, well, that's not their experience, but I've had many clients that actually really didn't feel a sexual attraction awakening in themselves towards themselves or to someone else until they were at the end of their college years. I've had many 17-year-olds, for instance, say to me, is there something wrong with me? Because I don't feel sexually attracted to anybody. You know, what's wrong with me? And this is where the awakening of our understanding of the complexity of sexuality and gender doesn't necessarily bring freedom to young people by saying to them, you need to know what your orientation is. They may not know when they're young. That actually might be something that unfolds over time. So sexual chemical attraction, that's a really interesting part that plays in the human being. And there are people that are trying to really prove the science of this. In New York, they have these things called pheromone parties, where you wear a t-shirt for a few days, you smell it up and you send your t-shirt to the party. People get to sniff you before they get to meet you. And then they date you with the 3 best sniffers. And that's actually just trying to really look at the chemistry of biology. Why would we want to be attracted to someone with a different genetic and hormonal profile? Survival of the fittest. It's all the science behind it. But that doesn't take into consideration there are also other aspects of attraction. So we jump up from physical attraction, which is interesting. I've had many people say, I'm attracted to people I don't want to be. That's interesting. Not everybody likes the fact that they have sexual attraction to certain people. It can happen for a young male that, with the intensity of that procreative force, when a young male's ejaculating at 13, over 200 million sperm per ejaculation. That's a huge procreative force. And that means that their body can be stimulated into sexual attraction at times when it's not appropriate for them. It's actually not their will, but it is their willy, is what I say to the young people. You got to work this out. You don't have to be embarrassed that your body is responding. This is a biological response. What's your intention? What's your will? Rather than what is the will of this biology that's drawing you in a certain direction. It's one aspect of us, it's not all aspects of us. So we also have emotional attraction, and this is quite interesting. Often I work with students, I might be with a group of year 12 students, and there are some year 12 students that have already engaged in sexual activity and know what that's about. There are others that have no experience with others, and some that have absolutely no experience at all, just has not awoken for them. And on the other hand, you have people in the class that know what crushing is and falling in love is, and others that don't. And they're not always the same people. There are people that are actually engaged in sexuality, never crushed, never fallen in love. Others that have been crushing since they were 9 years old, but have no sexual drive, no sexual awakening. That's how complex it is. So we can have this awareness of crushing on another human being. A child can actually express that consciously at 9 years old. And it's important for them to know that your crushes are not determining your sexual orientation necessarily. And that's where it gets quite complex. There are people that are really good at crushing, and they crush on everyone. They crush on their teachers, they crush on their friends, parents, they crush on, crushing here, crushing there. They can crush on both sexes. That doesn't immediately determine their orientation sexually. Who they crush on, who they fall in love with may be different from who they are drawn to in a sexual way. And then in between that, which is interesting, is the social conditioning or the family patterns. And that's obviously a very complex thing to consider. That, as these different fads and social pictures get impressed upon the children, what is attractive? What's not attractive? At the moment, one of the fastest growing plastic surgeries in America is bottom implants. Certainly wasn't plastic surgery happening when I was a teenager. And that's an interesting thing, that we can actually condition a whole group of people on what is attractive. I remember one of the year 11 students, when I was talking to them about this, it kind of blew his mind a little bit. It's like, you're right, I never used to be attracted to big bottoms, and now I am. It's like, I thought that was me. And realizing, no, you get pushed with imagery all the time of what is attractive. That affects our conditioning. And this can come down to things like how much hair is somebody able to have on their body, whether I'll actually feel attracted to them. Some people feel put off by someone having natural bodily hair. Now that's actually connected to a social conditioning. And so there is this complexity that occurs in that direction. You know, we can sometimes find people attractive that are socially popular. Are they attractive, or is that a conditioning of the social realm? And this particular area, it gets quite effective when looking at young people, because, and if we go to the next slide, Laura, this is something that's really important to understand. Around the age of about 10 years old, 9.5, 10, the child begins to awaken up to a few very human experiences inwardly. And that is, they begin to have these experiences that are quite existential at times for them. They may feel a real genuine sense of loneliness or isolation. And although a kindergarten child might say, oh, no one wants to play with me, or I feel all alone, it's very different from a 10-year-old, where they actually feel really like something in them is on their own. They begin to have this fear of rejection and seeking acceptance. And that starts to change their behaviors to people. They also can have these feelings of longing or feeling like they're missing out on something. So that's why you hear the 10-year-old saying things like, everyone gets to stay up late except for me. Everyone gets to eat junk food, or whatever the everyone is. But that's archetypal, that they're waking up to some of these, what we call human experiences. Now, if you recall what I mentioned before, that we're conditioned by the collective consciousness by the age of 6, but we really play that conditioning out upon each other once these human feelings arise. So I say to people, if you want to know how you're doing as a community around things like gender diversity, acceptance, around things like racism, anything that actually marginalizes other members of the community, any aspect that marginalizes another aspect of the community, you can actually go and look at how class 4, 10, 11, 12-year-olds play together. Because if they use, for instance, terms like someone being gay in a derogatory sense, we know as a community we're not doing well around that. If they start using racist terms in a derogatory sense, if they do this thing about girl germs, boy germs, we know as a community we're not doing well with that, because children clearly are not born racist, they're not born sexist. But when these human feelings arise, then they start trying to orientate to where they're going to find a way of trying to overcome these things. And so, you know, we can have, for instance, a severely disabled child in kindergarten, and everyone plays with that child as best they can. You have girls and boys absolutely best friends in kindergarten. If you can play, you can play. Come class 3, class 4, we start seeing changes if we as a community haven't got a holistic approach to that. The children start to play it out on each other. So these human experiences begin around that age, they grow over time, and by the time the child's in class 7, you hear things like, this school doesn't get me, nobody really gets me. By the time we're in class 8, 9, and certainly class 9, these feelings are rocking inwardly. And I've had numerous amounts of students say the reason they had sex is they thought everyone else was. Didn't want to be the only one not doing it. The reason they entered into something is they didn't want to be rejected. They didn't want to be isolated. They thought they were missing out on something. So really part of our support with a developing young person is helping them to actually bear these things, to let them know that it's normal, it's actually human at times to feel these things. Whether you're going to be wallowing in them, and also we're clearly looking out for young people that they're not suffering in that to the extent where it's being missed. But every child at some point will experience these things. But 15-year-olds don't say to each other, "Are you having that profound isolation thing?" No, they don't. And Facebook and social media makes it appear like they're the only ones going through what they're going through. So part of our Western approach is, we don't want our children to be left out. We don't want them to feel lonely. We don't want them to feel like they're not in. And yet, actually, resilience is developed if a child can manage that. And I let, parents know this at as early an age as possible, because by the time they're in year 10, year 12, and there's substances going around the party, and they will be there, if they can't manage loneliness and isolation, if they can't bear rejection, if they can't bear missing out on something, that means they can't stand the ground inwardly. They actually can't manage to withstand things that can really take them off track. And that can account for lots of experiences a young person has, not just around substance, but around sexuality. We want them to really come into the world knowing that they have to find their right relationship to it. They need to have these capacities in themselves to actually make decisions that are going to navigate them through these very human experiences. But to actually go into sexuality because you don't want to be the odd one out, that's not a power position to stand in relationship to the world. So should we go back to the, we'll go back to the other screen. So we have this physical sexual attraction. We have social attraction, which is interesting. It can also come out of the familiar patterns. We have the crushing and falling in love, and we also can be attracted to people because we grow more in relationship with that individual. We become more, we are more because we've been in relationship with that person. And, the complex thing about being human is that these 4 types of attraction can awaken at different stages for different people. And the problem is when we live in our own skin, we don't recognize how completely diverse we can be as human beings, but how real it is. How real it is for some people. For some people, their gender identity and their gender expression is very significant. For others, it's really not that significant. For some people, they need to have the crushing, falling in love before they have the sexuality. For others, absolutely not necessarily whatsoever. And we tend to put upon others what lives in us rather than begin to wake up to this very complex human experience and see if we can allow other people to unfold in the way that is most right and healthy for them. Try not to stuff ideas upon them. Of course, we can do this in all directions. We are at the moment stuffing ideas on young people by asking them to determine their sexual orientation at a very young age. Not all of them know that. We really need to support a freedom, but not a freedom that comes out of that kind of westernized, I want to be free to do what I want with who I want, when I want. It's not that kind of freedom. It's really that inner freedom where as an individual, you can come into relationship with gender and sexuality out of much more a self-determined place and no outer kind of authorities determining your expression or your experience. But clearly, that can take time, that maturation process. It's often not to around 16 and a half that a young person can actually look upon themselves and be aware of their inner feeling life as though they're looking at a friend. They can look into themselves and go, oh, I'm really irritated today. But before that, 15-year-olds, they just are the irritation. They can't step back. And that's the ability to step back means that we can start engaging with that internal dialogue. What really is my choice, rather than what is being placed upon me from outside of myself. Now, many of you would know that complexive attraction means that you can be sexually attracted to people that you're not necessarily in love with. I often say, is that just me? No, it's probably not just me. It's life. It's life. You can fall in love with people but not be sexually attracted to them. We're complex beings. We can actually need to spend time with someone that's really important for our growth and development, but it does not mean I want a sexual relationship. It does not mean I'm in love with that person. And this complexity actually, we actually limit really healthy relationships because we put relationships all down to sexuality. And what's wonderful about World of Education is that we really keep that social dynamic from the very beginning. As Steiner said, all the children are doing the same things, but we're also working so that they can be friends with each other. That it does not have to be that I need to actually slightly alter my consciousness, get drunk in order to be able to speak to somebody that I might be sexually attracted to, but rather friendships develop. And we know that if we can support the development of friends in various ways between people, not always dividing them around gender and sexuality, but really support the community relationship, that they do a lot better with making decisions later on in life about how and who they want to be in relationship with. If you're kind of segregating children, making the only the girls do this, only the boys do that, then it actually means that not only are parts of the class not being met in that because they really don't orientate to the boy-girl story at all, but it also means that we're actually placing them according to their body and not according to their inner capacity as individuals to express and share with each other. And it's really quite something. You go look at kindergarten, they're not so worried about that. But come the time where they're concerned, will I be acceptable if I like playing with someone of the opposite sex? It's unfortunate that today that we've put in so much emphasis on the external human being that we're actually losing sight of these very important aspects of who we are. And that's something that as a community we can do a lot about. So I usually say to people, if we notice that the class 4, class 5 children are struggling around their play, as a community we have to do something about that. You can't moralize children. It's us being reflected in the psyche of the children. However, once a child reaches about 14 and Steiner says they're kind of really here in the world, they are now a part of the collective consciousness. So from 14 on, we can really bring in their social justice, really show them what they are participating in, when every time they see a girl, they comment on their outer appearance, rather than just who are they, and always expecting this or that of a boy or a girl, but rather how do we get beyond the peripheral and really look at who is this individual. First prerequisite of a Waldorf teacher, to have reverence for this individual and the capacities that they have.
Yeah, Lisa, wow. I mean, this is such a helpful framework and really expresses the complexity. I'm so glad that it's here. And I think some people are asking questions, and I just wanted to let them know that we will get to those in a little bit. So thank you. And yeah, I'm picturing all kinds of situations where maybe I could have done a little better, or I made an assumption, or or I categorized things. So thank you. So I'll go ahead and continue. I just wanted to let folks know that I can't see their questions right now, but I'll see them in just a few minutes. Thanks.
Right. And I think, in a way, we're all growing. This is one of the hard things about this topic. It's confronting, because we've all been conditioned. We all have our way of seeing things. And yet, if we're going to work towards a new community form where we really work together and respect more the individual, then we have to be prepared to kind of open this conditioning up and just sort of see, how do we want to move forward? How can we work with that? So because of this complexity, there's a few little keys I suggest. One is, when you're teaching a child for the first time, for instance, about puberty, you don't need to bring sexuality and procreation into the first introduction to puberty, because puberty is really their body going from a child's body to an adult body. By saying that your puberty is about your sex, although often it's the way it is actually taught together, you're actually setting up something that's not completely understanding the complexity of the human being. Some individuals may indeed be asexual, meaning their puberty has got nothing to do with their sex. Some individuals may go on and clearly never use their sexuality for procreation of another being. And yet we often bring it as though that's how it is. And so actually just making clarity that there is a complexity, and introducing puberty quite separately from sexuality, quite separately from procreation, is a wise understanding of the developing individual. And those little things. And also what's really important is to make sure that children know that it's a really wide spectrum of when these things are going to awaken for them. Every time I talk to young people, they are relieved, because they all feel, is there something wrong with them? Am I normal? It's about these human experiences, and we actually we amplify that by giving them limited pictures of the complexity of the human being. And of course, we also have to be aware that a lot of the education around sexuality, whether you know it or not, is going to come through pornography. And that's actually an aspect that will meet the child's life at some point. So we are now being asked to actually give, in a way, other nourishment so that they have something to weigh that up against. Often we feel like, well, there's this education that's coming through the internet, there's this pornographic education, that's kind of enough. But really, we want to make sure that we give all the part that's missing. And I often say that, we don't need to give more explicit kind of details of sexuality to children, to teenagers, to young adults, because they have plenty of that. What they really are missing is the aspect of intimacy, the aspect of relationships, the humanness of it, the complexity of it, the fact that it's not so easy as they've perhaps been educated to think it's going to be. That actually their relationship to relationships has many more dimensions in it. And so, it's good to educate young people that there is a difference between, for instance, junk food sex and whole food sex. In fact, in Australia, one of the young people coined the term Macca's sex, because we call McDonald's Macca's in Australia. So, yeah, we know what Macca's sex is like. You eat it and afterwards you're like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. It's really useful for young people to have a sense of there is a difference. There's not just Macca's sex in the world. There's also really nourishing whole food sex. However, Just because somebody's eating junk food does not mean to say you don't keep giving them healthy food, because we know the more they can have the healthy pictures, the more they're able to find, where do I stand in that? What actually is going to serve me better? We don't want it to be a one-sided education. Working holistically means that we want to make sure that there's a roundedness to the education around gender and sexuality, and it is not just one-sided. And I would say that they get plenty of a certain aspect of the education. So we don't need, as sex educators or teachers, to kind of be up with all the language and sort of feel like we're like the teenagers. Not at all. We want to be able to give them much more the human side, the part that they just can't get without actually having other human beings be in conversation with them. We're complex human beings, and they need to understand that, and there is nothing wrong with them that they're complex, and they don't need to already identify their sex, their gender, how they're going to live life at an early age. It, for a lot of people, takes a long time to understand. For some, it's an ongoing growth process. On the other hand, there are other people who are incredibly clear at an early age. And such a diverse experience and expression. And to try and find room for all of that so that people can feel, I can find my way through this. I can really find and discover what is true to me and live a life that I know will help me unfold in the direction I want to. Hard for children because they're so influenced. You know, there's a scientific term that came out some couple of years ago in America called friendfluence. Friendfluence means that if your friend, for instance, is a smoker, you're 45% more likely to smoke. If your friend's an overeater, you're 45% more likely to overeat. We used to know who our children's friends were. Now we don't, because they're being influenced by the technology. They have a lot of influence from areas that we sometimes don't have any awareness of. And that friendfluence affects their choices. It's not a freedom when they're being conditioned into thinking certain things around gender and sexuality. How do we make sure that they come to a certain resilience in themselves? If they bear those three human experiences, if they know that actually they've got to come to their individual relationship to these questions, and at the same time allow others to come to that as well, we can start working a little more healthily as a community together. So perhaps we should look at questions, and then I can come back to more of the picture.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. And so, yeah, I'm going to just stop the share here so I can see everybody's questions. And it's likely if you've typed a question in that other people can see it, just so you're aware of that. So, okay, here we go. All right, so here are the questions. Here we go. Just going to take a minute and say that I wish you had been in my school, because wow, I mean, it's so much fuller of a picture of what the age range where things can come awake, and not really having to make those decisions or have that pressure so early, and just being able to sort of feel into things. So thank you for that. Okay, let's see. It might take me 1 minute to look here. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I think a little bit has been addressed. So if I don't get to all of them, I just want everyone to know they can email me their questions and I can pass them on to Lisa, or you can check out the resources that she has, including the book, of course. Okay.
Yeah. Along with that book, I also, on the website developingtheself.org, there's a whole manual of which you can see what is introduced to the children at different ages, because as you could be aware, in World of Education we really want to bring in what is actually healthy and supportive to the different age of the child. Where are they in their development, and what aspects will meet them. So actually in class 5, when we talk about puberty, we spend a lot of time actually talking about the change of teeth, not puberty. Why is that? Because that's the time when their bodies went from being a small child's body to a grown child's to a grown child ready for schooling. It took 5 to 7 years for this change to take place. And they can see their body's already done that once, and this next cycle is going to have some familiar patterns to it. You know, in this society, we're very embarrassed about puberty. Other societies are not so embarrassed. They're like, well, we're in puberty. Yeah, we're in puberty. We're in puberty. And so this is a health, every human being, if you're going to reach out and hold, you're going to change your teeth, you're going to go through puberty. That's part of the process. You find a question for us, Laura?
Yeah, I think I do have one. Okay. So can you speak to gender diversity in early childhood? For example, when a child doesn't identify with their assigned sex at birth, and how teachers in Waldorf schools can meet the needs of these children. That's from Kendra. Thank you. So this is in early childhood we're talking. Maybe you have some experience with this. And
yeah. Well, look, part of that, you know, it's interesting when Rudolf Steiner said 100 years ago, we never choose a teacher based on their sex. We choose them based on their capacities. And then to see that reverence for this individual child, if we are working out of that and we've actually been able to move on our conditioning, and we can just adapt our language, we should not be able to put a child in the confrontation of their gender identity every day. I had a situation where I had a teacher that had would ask the girls to sit on the moon symbol in the class and the boys to sit on the sun symbol on the class. And we had a child in that class that actually was unsure of where they sat on that gender expression. And that meant every day that child had to actually go, well, where do I sit? And then every day the class had to be aware of where they were sitting. And so I actually just something simple said, can you ask the children that feel a little bit more inward, reflective, sit on the moon sign, and those that feel vibrant and bright today sit on the sun sign, rather than dividing them? Because we've actually been put as a requisite in Waldorf education not to divide the children. And yet we sometimes do because it's easier for class discipline. But don't think that through. If you put a girl next to a boy to keep them behaving, that's not a great image for the future of the psyche of that child. So we have to really think about how are we working with a class. We don't have to confront gender every day. If we're not calling out, okay, boys, I want you to do this, and girls, I want you to do that. You don't have to confront that, and therefore take the child out of the world of the child. They come to kindergarten to play. They come to kindergarten to imagine. They don't come to kindergarten to have to be confronted by their gender every day.
Great, thank you. And thanks for that question. Okay, yeah, so there are a few more here. So, and I apologize if I can't get to all of these up front. So this is an interesting one when we're talking about the complexity of attraction. Neil is asking, I'm grateful for the reminder that what we call attraction can come from so many different places. Along these lines, I'm curious to hear thoughts on how to work in school with students who may be pursuing relationships with each other, but coming from different vantage points and where their interest is coming from. Like maybe this one's a crush, or maybe this one's a physical attraction, or maybe this one's like, you know, you're my karmic partner, or, you know, the individual one, who knows? So yeah.
Look, I think that's incredibly important that we step back on our projections and assumptions, because often parents already start saying things about their own child's sexuality, and it's got necessarily nothing to do with that. And it's actually to do with ourselves projecting something upon the world of the child rather than actually allowing for these various possibilities. I also think comes a point where you can let young people understand this. So usually around 14, I would bring in a lesson on the complexity of attraction. Very helpful for young people because it actually allows them to understand it's already been there in the class, and it also allows them to understand others and how we're so different in these various ways. And it also gives this breathing space around other types of relationship. Just because you're engaged with someone, you're interested in them, does not mean sexuality. And unfortunately, sometimes we as adults make these mistakes. I had a group of year 8 students talk to me and say, look, every time we're talking as a group, and these were a group of girls, one of the teachers comes up to us and says things like, what are you doing? You're gossiping about boys. And I was so furious. How can you put that on us? Why do you keep putting that on us? And the thing about young people is we can't lead them if we constantly put on forms that don't make sense to them. We lose them. So we need to actually travel with them when it comes to the changes that they're much more aware of. Now, when we were young, we might not have been able to name, I feel sexually drawn in this direction, but I feel emotionally drawn in that direction. We would have had the experiences, but not been able to articulate the complexity. Young people today can actually articulate that complexity. Consciousness has moved on a little bit.
Thanks, Lisa. Great questions. Okay, a few more. Here we go. So I just heard you, I think this might have answered Nico's question already about the ideal time for teaching sex ed. And so maybe more around that age 14.
Well, look, sex ed is a broad subject. So, depending on the class, I would say that talking about puberty and making it natural is useful when the class starts moving towards puberty, making it natural, having that conversation. I do not separate the boys and girls for that conversation because it isn't a part of how the future community is going to look. And it actually really helps to understand the fact that there are these various expressions and how to be respectful and kind to each other. So puberty, which has nothing to do with sexuality, comes in around that age. And then as they grow into beginning to understand attraction, it's useful for them to begin to have those questions. And usually around class 7, we might do the main lesson in anatomy and physiology, the biology main lesson. And so there's another dimension that comes into the school. And then I would say class 8, talking about the complexity of attraction, but I don't bring in the complexity or the dimensions of the sexual act as experiential processes until class 10, until the child is over 16. However, you have your family community and your class community. At home, you may feel the need because of the experiences in your own family life or because of your extended family to actually describe a lot more about gender and sexuality at an earlier age. But we're talking about one as a social education. How do you make sure we integrate what is happening in the social atmosphere of the class in a holistic way together? And so there's a difference between a social program that goes in to the collective class community than what someone that may do at home as a parent, because you've got to look at your individual child. Is this a child that you can actually look face to face and talk about puberty and sexuality? Or do you need to have a conversation with friends while they're in earshot so you can actually inform them but not look them in the eye? You learn about your own child in that way. The school, however, has a different part to play. It's really about the social understanding aspect and working together as a class community in a really healthy way.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, just so everyone knows, I will be sending out Lisa's website and information. We have a couple of people asking them. Okay, so I think we have time for one or two more questions. Here's one that's a little more esoteric. Do you think we have, this is Lisa asking, do you think we have more children incarnating who seem to have fluid gender identity? And might that increase, and how do we work with that? It's kind of an interesting question about.
It's a really interesting question. And I would say, I would put it like this. We have a lot more children incarnating that want to be recognized as individuals. And so they don't necessarily agree with the conditioning that's coming from outside of them. Now, they might then find a language for that as I'm not just that. You know, I'm not just that. Because they're not just that. You know, when we enter into earthly life and we take up this bodily vehicle, and interesting enough, Steiner said it's the destiny of every man to be born a woman, the destiny of every woman to be born a man. In a certain sense, to have these varying experiences, we might incarnate into one body and then another body. But what's more important is to actually get beyond the bodily vehicle and try to really see who is this individual and what capacities are they bringing. And I think that's what they're really helping to herald in, an age where we go beyond gender. Steiner actually said anthroposophy would herald in an age that actually allows us to really seek the individual and get beyond gender. But in the process to do that, we need to kind of unpick all the conditioning and also really recognize that for some people, gender is incredibly important. For others, that's not so important. We actually live into our bodies quite differently also. You know, some people, for instance, get hangry. Hangry scientifically, it means that when you're hungry, you're angry. It's how. Other people think, yeah, you're making that up. You're just giving an excuse to be mean, because other people don't have any experience of that. Some people have a definite relationship where their inner world and their body are really absolutely connected, and others not so. So there's an incredible difference in that realm. And so we can't negate that someone might have clarity around gender identity, but I also think there is a new wave coming, and it's not just in the realm of gender, but where people are not fitting the mold. We're seeing much more of that in all sorts of ways, in the way people learn, the way people express themselves, the way people socialize. We're not fitting molds anymore. We're really saying, look at who we are, look at how we need to start treating each other as individuals as we go forward.
Great. Okay. So I've had this question asked twice, and this is the one we'll have to end on, unless you decide that you want to email this answer. I've had 3 people now ask about fairy tales and gender, and Norse and Greek, and predominantly male perspectives within the curriculum, and questions about this. So maybe you can just overall, and then we'll have to end there, everyone. So feel free to send your questions to me.
It's a wonderful question. I get it asked numerous times a year. The difficult thing is that we have to understand that the fairy tale itself is not an expression of many people. The fairy tale is an expression of the one person. And some, of course, fairy tales are just moralizations of the age, but the archetypal fairy tales that are used within the Waldorf School are expression of the interior, complex human experience. And every human being has that part of them that can be gentle and devoted to the other. And every human being has that part of them that can willfully bring themselves into the world. We actually have all of this complexity living within us. And, the fairy tales are an expression of that. However, with our way of seeing and understanding, we no longer kind of meet the world in symbol in the way that we used to. We often meet the world as kind of literal. We in a way, got the epidemic of literalism occurring, where we really don't see that actually the arts are trying to move and express something in the interior life of the human being. And so for my experience, I'd say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't get rid of all fairy tales, because they work esoterically. They work to deeply meet and nourish the inner world of the child. However, the fairy tales of the age should be able to meet and bring understanding that is not intellectual to the community that they are being worked in, which would mean that fairy tales in Australia might be different than fairy tales that might be introduced when we have certain expressions in a community, would be brought for this age. Don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. There's some extraordinary pictures in those fairy tales, and I do talk about that in one of my esoteric books, which is called Living Inner Development, in more detail. And it's just like, you know, when I go and see a piece of work by Shakespeare, I identify with these characters because I know that lives in me. I know Richard III, that's actually manipulative, and actually I can feel that human quality too. Just because it's a male and a king does not bother me, because I live with the symbol. For others, though, we actually have to broaden our world with that. But there's a lot of extraordinary power in the nourishment of the inner world. And we're reading the fairy tales through the exterior world. But, you know, a lot of this will be gone into in detail through these 2 courses that are coming up in America. In the Chicago Waldorf School in June is hosting a 3-day course on working holistically with gender and sexuality. And then in the renewal course, there's a week-long course in July. And that will be, each day we'll be going into the various things to be bringing in the different ages and stages of the children, why we do what we do, and how we keep this education filled with meaning in an age where we're being asked to meet it. We really are being asked to meet it.
Lisa, thank you so much for your work, and I'm so glad that people can come and take a deeper dive with you, and I want to go too, and I'm just so thankful. And Stephanie, thanks for being on here to host too. I think maybe you could say a little goodbye to folks. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to
Thank you,
Osna.
Lisa.
Thank you to Osna for hosting us here as well.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for your amazing questions. Please take a deeper dive with Lisa or email them to me and we'll see what we can do. And thank you again. Take care, everyone.